I've been doing nonviolent direct action, creative nonviolent direct action since about 1980, give or take a few years. And and the reason why I do this work at the very base level is that using art in protest, or I actually use a bigger term, I call it creative cultural resistance, because I think the world is much bigger than arts of protest. When people hear art, they think of painting or drawing or maybe theater or dance. But the spectrum of the work is huge. And I've done a little bit of research, although I'm not an academic, and I've identified about a dozen methodologies for this work, all the way from, placards and painted things that you automatically assume is art, to things like cultural institution building, which is probably the most energy that you can put into any kind of cultural work ever. And the spectrum in there includes using things like delineation of space, peace parks, preservation of language, music, movement, sound, dance, that whole spectrum of things that you could imagine. So we have a lot to work with. And that's where I start. And the reason why I start there is because in this world that we've all been talking about of corporate homogenization, acknowledging and including and welcoming and then utilizing our cultural wholes is the biggest way to stand up to this corporate homogenization and encourage people in their own capacity to take charge of their lives. And so this is at a very gut level what we find is effective in mobilizing people and keeping people involved in the movement long term. So that's also where the media and our ability to disseminate this information actually is critical as well, because that's how numbers grow. And if we're involved in nonviolent direct action, we're involved in a movement that bases its power on what? People, right? We got to have more people, and so we need to get the word out there in a big way. So actually, I do a lot of work. I don't like to lecture, so I do a lot of work that doesn't include lecturing, but includes bringing in information from the group. And so I would like to play with you for a minute or two, since we've all been sitting for about, an hour or so. If everybody would stand up, if you're willing. We're here to talk about iconic direct action. So I'm just guessing that everybody in the room, when I say direct action or when anybody else said nonviolent action or civil disobedience or something in that realm, you all have some kind of idea about some event or some person that took some action that falls into that big category. I would like everybody to think about what it is and then silently put yourself in a position that communicates that. So I don't know if it looks like this, I don't know if it looks like this, I don't know if you're lying on the floor, but we'll take a second to get in our positions, bring in the world of nonviolent action, resistance, and then we'll look around the room and call out what we see. We'll talk about a little bit of it. Okay? Is everybody ready? Okay, do something. Go for it. Let's see. And as you do that, we'll give you a second to get in it. What do you see? What do people see? What are people doing? What are you doing? Anybody?
Holding up a sign.
Holding a sign.
We shall overcome.
Raising a fist.
Poster. What are you doing in the back? With your fist in the air, what are you doing? The Black Panther movement. I was thinking immediately of the Olympics.
Right.
Right? Anybody else? What are people doing?
Sitting on a bulldozer.
Sitting on a bulldozer.
Holding hands.
Holding hands.
We
Community.
shall overcome.
We shall overcome. Singing.
Hanging from a banner.
Hanging from a banner.
Sitting in an office.
Yeah, Che, what do you got over here?
Oh, throwing something.
Ah. Awesome. Okay. Woo. Oh, and what are you doing? Praying. Thank you so much. Okay, that was really nice. Just to get a little movement going. So first of all, we can use creative resistance to take on the opponent, right? And there's a lot of ways we can take on the opponent. And the second way that we use cultural resistance is to build ourselves up, to support the movement in general, to build our own culture, to get people involved, and to make it work for us, right, in a lot of ways. And the third thing that we can do is actually create or be the change that we want to see, right? Prefigurative stuff. Put it right out there. We want the library to stay open, we keep the library open, right? So that kind of stuff. And the thing that comes to mind when I talk about all of this is, and everybody's been mentioning it, effectiveness. How do you know if you're effective in what you've chosen to do? Anybody?
Facebook likes.
Facebook likes, is that it? Oh, is that all life is? How do we know? It's a word that begins with G. Come on. How do you know if you're effective in your life? You have a goal, right? So it's really important that we start with a goal. I know this is very basic, but when you are doing a direct action, if you're running a campaign, if you're thinking about doing media, if you're the lawyer for a direct action campaign, you need to know what the activist goal is. You need to know what your goal is as a lawyer in supporting the community that you work with. So it's really important that you actually identify your goal and that the goal is within some kind of strategy. And after that, pretty much everything that we're talking about today is tactics, right? So your tactics need to be directly related to your goal and your strategy. And within that, there's a lot of questions, right? If you want to maximize your visual effectiveness, then you actually want to maximize your chances of success and your effectiveness overall. And that's why you have to work this way. Now, there are some things that we know about direct action and campaigns. We know, in fact, that one of the ways nonviolent campaigns are effective is when they're planned, because planning allows you to be innovative and not do, as Daniel said, a march and a candlelight vigil over and over and over again, those boring things that don't get you different results. This is actually from Istanbul. In the summer, there was a march. And one of the reasons why things like this are so effective is because what do you recognize about that banner? Even though it says anti-capitalista, what do you think, if you looked at it quickly, it would say Coca-Cola. So subvertising. One of the really important things that you want to do is show, don't tell when you do your work. And some of these things are actually written up in a book called Beautiful Trouble, which Regina mentioned. And I do have a few copies to sell, but not many. But a lot of it is online. Here is another example from Istanbul. I love it because it integrates attention to your audience, right? An awareness of your collective culture, and it's very public. So this is the breaking of the Ramadan fast in the streets of Istanbul this summer, right? When Gezi Park had been shut down and the protests were happening there. It was incredibly beautiful, powerful, inspiring, and able to be reproduced everywhere. Amnesty International and a lot of people, including Greenpeace and other groups of activists who are working with environmental issues, but particularly human rights issues, one of the jobs that we have to do as activists is make the invisible visible, right? When trouble happens far away from you, whether it's somebody's put in prison or the environmental destruction that is in West Virginia and you live here, you need to bring it home. So in this case, Boston activists turned bus shelters into homes. It's a sort of a double play on words, or maybe not double play on words, but a double play on the problem itself of people being evicted, having no place to go, ending up in bus shelters, or actually, and then also bringing the problem right into people's lives who aren't necessarily dealing with it either. So it was a very beautiful series of actions. This is another extrapolation, what do you call it? Taking something from the popular culture and turning it around. These are the tax dodgers based on a baseball team. They're actually in the Hall of Fame now. That giant card, I happen to be a puppeteer among other things and a crafter, and I made that giant baseball mitt. It's cardboard. So we're talking about simple materials that are environmentally appropriate, can be used for lots of things, and are easily transportable. This is actually Tahrir Square in Egypt, graffiti. Of course, there's plenty of ways that visual work can support the work that we do. It's very important. I'll tell just a tiny little story about some other visual work. In Washington, D.C., we always would wheat paste. We'd take posters and stick them up with non-toxic stuff all over the city to announce events that were happening. For years, we'd been hounded and arrested and fined by the police. But eventually, we had a lawyer friend look at the regulations, and what we were doing was not illegal. And so we actually carried with us, now we carry the regulations so that we can tell the police. So this is one little thing where it actually, we had thought, for years it just had been passed on. Watch out, you're going to be arrested. And the police provided the support for that wrong notion, and it took a while for us to undo it. This is another projection that Mark showed, a whole bunch of projections. This is a very early projection, basically a public service announcement, right? These are nuclear weapons in a harbor, and we felt like we should announce it. Another drive-in. I'll just quickly talk about, anybody recognize this picture? Sorry, it's so small. It's Estonia. There's a really fabulous movie called The Singing Revolution about the Estonians, and in fact all the Baltic states stood up to the Soviet power in the early 1990s, 89, 90, 91. And pretty much, this is about a quarter of the population of Estonia singing. And believe it or not, that's exactly how they actually got rid of the Soviets in the end. And there were masses of people at one point standing in the road singing, guarding their TV and radio tower station. Their TV station, the tower. And that prevented the tanks, the Soviet tanks, from actually taking over what would have destroyed their ability to connect with each other. So it's very powerful. It's a really great story. But it only worked, of course, because that was the culture there. Everyone, and they have huge singing festivals. Routinely, a quarter of the country comes together and sings. The Soviets couldn't figure out how to ban that. They couldn't figure out how to control it. The people started singing the national anthem. What are you going to do, shoot a quarter of the population? How do you do that? So it was a massive nonviolent action. And there's plenty of examples through history about singing revolutions, if you will, right? In this country, you can look at the civil rights struggle. You can look at South Africa, another great movie called Amandla. Another whole series that you might want to look at that touches on a lot of these city-state struggles called A Force More Powerful. It's a PBS series. It's available online. And of course, if we're looking at cultural work and iconic images and breaking the law, do people recognize this picture?
Salt.
Salt.
India.
Gandhi.
And Gandhi, right? These are women actually making salt. And the most amazing thing about this, people will often, I've been in arguments, well, one of the most amazing things about this is that this salt became an actual tangible representation of the Indians' demand for independence, right? So the idea that you're going to talk to somebody, oh, what we really need is independence, when somebody's really hungry or really needs salt, something really basic, is difficult. But if you can tie it to something tangible, then your work becomes much easier. And the fact that it was illegal to make salt, that the British had a monopoly over the salt production, also provided them a way to continue their fight through the legal system, through the court system, as they were doing their work. And I'll just end here, I think, talking about the fact that whatever we do, we should do it well, although within reason. If what you're making is going to be arrested in a couple hours, then maybe you don't have to stay up all night, worry about putting gold leaf on it. But if what you're going to be using is going to be used over time, or can be continued to be used, or if it's going in someplace specific, you want to spend the appropriate amount of time to make it appropriate for people to look at, and who want to look at, who will pass it on. And certainly, that's an example. This is the big giant goddess of liberation who was gagged in Seattle after they basically established a First Amendment free zone. People are aware in 1999 of all the legal improprieties, I would say, the constitutional improprieties that happened in the protests in Seattle. So that's one thing that we needed help from all kinds of lawyers on, and we were glad to have that support. I'll say that in the end, the big piece about this work is that it's up to all of us to take part in it. So whatever community we're from, or whatever draws us to this work, if we're artists, if we're lawyers, if we're activists, wherever we find something that we can be active in, or we can make a change in, that's what we need to do. And so I'm really happy that we have a law school that's interested in talking about activism and the intersection of activism and legal work, and how we can make it be more effective. So thanks very much.